Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Renewables podcast. I'm today joined by, of course, Mark, my co-host. So hi there, Mark. And we've got a guest here. We've got Josh Powell from Inspire Green. How are you doing, Josh?
Hello, yeah, good. Yourself?
Yeah, very good, thanks. But Mark, how are you? I need to check in with you first, of course.
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. We've had a busy old week. We've just been chatting off there, all in the solar areas, different projects and different activities. But yeah, busy as ever.
Yeah, good, good. Well, we all like to be busy, but yeah, today we've got Josh on who has a company called Inspire Green, and basically they do big solar PV. But I'm not going to steal his thunder. I'm going to welcome Josh to the Renewables podcast and let you fire away, Josh, with a bit of an overview of Inspire Green, what sort of work you do, where you're based, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, no worries. So my name is Josh. I founded a company called Inspire Green based in South Wales. Started about 2.5 years ago, mainly looking at commercial sectors, but we've done a number of domestic properties as well. Throughout our time, we've sort of used predominantly Solis over the last bit, but we're now moving into Solar Edge more and more, as I think that the regulations are going to change over time, that optimizers and microinverters and the like are going to be more prevalent. And sort of our typical project scale now is sort of 100 to 400 kilowatts is what we're doing more so. And we're growing that out now into sort of 600 megawatt projects that we're just starting to get into the final phases of design on.
Very good. That's some meaty work there, and yeah, 2.5 years and moving to SE now. Solar Edge, us Solar Edge boffins, we like to call it SE, but but yeah, Solar Edge now, a man after my own heart. But yeah, so you're based in South Wales as well, you mentioned.
Correct.
And what sort of area do you cover? Do you cover like sort of nationwide, or do you kind of try and
For
keep
the
it fairly
larger
local?
scale projects, we certainly cover nationwide, but we're predominantly focused on Wales and the southwest. So, anywhere that we can travel within sort of 2.5 hours of Cardiff, because that's sort of typical scale where hotel accommodation starts to make more sense and overnight costs. But yeah,
Mm,
certainly within inside 2.5 hours of Cardiff.
cool.
So they're big old systems that you're working on, Josh. And I know from chatting off there, you started out with some smaller domestic stuff. What are the key differences between those two things? I'm interested as a small installer now. I know Sam's done some bigger stuff than I have, but is there things that are different from a paperwork side, or is it all just about the install?
It's a lot about the install, and once you sort of hit 100 kilowatts, they start to rinse and repeat over because there's only so large inverter you can use, and they start to multiply out, especially on sort of the large trapezoidal roofs or large flat roof systems that we do. On the paperwork side, in some cases, it's easier because you don't go through the full MCS process with those large systems. So there's less on the compliance side, but there's more so on the grid side. So we're just talking off air about sort of G99s, and domestic installers use sort of the web forms, and it's about a 2-page G99 document where you sort of talk about what's in and what's out. With the larger scale documents, and large scale now for the grid is anything over around 97 kilowatt. They've drawn this awkward line at. That's then depends whether it goes to your local DNO team or the large scale, especially in our area, which is National Grid. And so with that, then they make the sort of decision on what process to follow through, even on the large scale forms. And those large scale forms can be 20 to 30 pages long of documentation about what you're installing, different fault conditions of what you're installing, and sort of everything else along with it.
Wow.
Does that mean that there's a lot of kind of like 96.99 kilowatt systems going in going around the country? But yeah, I think on the paperwork side, just to touch on that from just even the domestic level, like we're about to start our first 100 kilowatt system, which would be our biggest system. And I know the paperwork around all of that is quite intense, but us as electricians, all of us here, we're not massive fans of paperwork, are we? I think it's fair to say. So do you have people that you employ that look after that, or do you deal with a lot of that paperwork yourself?
I deal a lot of it in house. So we're got about 10 people in total in Inspire Green now. And sort of only 3 of us are in the office, and most of us are on site on the tools. So I look after a lot of the technical design and form filling, which has to go on to facilitate everything that goes on site.
How long does that process take, Josh, from, say, first proposing a system at a large scale to actually getting out on site? What's the typical time frame?
So on the key timeframes, the grids generally take about 2.5 months, 2 months, 2.5 months on saying yes to a project. There's certain areas which they're quicker, and it depends on the time of year, but around that sort of timescale is what we budget. And then on the proposal to being accepted, generally takes around 8 months on a commercial project. It's quite a long lead time to get into it, but that's mainly because, especially on the amounts we're talking, it's a lot of yeses that are required internally.
Yeah, I guess that's involving a lot of forward planning in your business then, isn't it? You're kind of running ahead of that steam train of installation behind you quite far in advance, aren't you?
Correct. Yeah, it's definitely one of those that you need to have that pipeline there to make it all function. And there are the odd couple projects that we do which are sort of 50 to 70 kilowatt, which can pop in a lot quicker. But yeah, there's it's a large pipeline of commercial projects predominantly.
So your 50 kilowatt job is a bit like our 4 kilowatt job, isn't it? It's we're like, oh yes, great, we can sneak that into G98, and you're thinking, oh great, just a small little 60 kilowatt
Exactly,
project.
it's great. We've just finished this week a community centre for a local authority ran from us for 75 kilowatts, and we were like, great, nice little job to keep us all on. But yeah, that was 2 SE inverters and all the Modbus meters and associated, which is a really good product, to be honest.
So bringing things back to Mark's question, I suppose, about the differences. Obviously, we've touched on the paperwork there. Do you find that the actual difference in installing a 200 kilowatt project is much different technically than installing, say, like a 5 kilowatt, or if we bring it back down to your small systems, like a 20 kilowatt or a 30 kilowatt project? Do you find that it's much different in terms of what you have to do? Obviously, the time to install it was probably different, but the actual back end side of it and the planning that goes into it.
I think that the planning aspects are the lengthy part for any of these large projects. So, for example, one of our most recent projects was 390 kilowatt on a car park roof. We couldn't use cranes to get the material up there, and it was a relatively small car park. So it was probably about 2 weeks of planning internally to work out, how do we get the materials up there? Where's a safe loading zone? Where can we use as welfare facilities? It's all these sort of thoughts that go into it, which for more domestic, you're not worried about where can the guys go for food or heat up some bits, because there's a kitchen generally on site that customers are generally happy for you to use or have those facilities. So it's a lot more on the welfare and planning, and sort of even down to the fact that we get our designs at that scale validated with SolarEdge directly. We'll use their design tools, but their own techs will look over our work to make sure if there is anything we need to take into account. So yeah, on the install side, as you rightly say, it takes longer the larger the system, but there's certain bits of sort of scale in which mounting inverter, whether it's a 30 kilowatt or 100 kilowatt, takes roughly the same amount of time. So the scales of putting the panels down is where it is. The fact that it takes the fact that it only takes one person to put down one panel in 1 minute, for example, you still need 100 minutes to put down 100 panels if that was the scale. So some of it's linear, some of it's not.
I suppose a question for you, Mark, as well, is because you'll face as much as what we do when you're working in domestic properties. I suppose sometimes the installation could be more complicated because you've got kitchens, you've got carpets, you've got all these different things in what is these services and these items in your way. Whereas I suppose commercially, you've maybe just got a big plant room that you can fit this kit in with probably big switch gear there that you can connect this stuff in, maybe easier than us trying to fit something under a stairs or something like that. So that's quite a...
I mean, you see those challenges with normal electrical work. We don't do big solar stuff, but we do big normal electrical stuff in commercial,
of
industrial
course.
environments, and it's the same sort of principle, isn't it? If you're ripping someone's house apart, not that we rip them apart, but you get the vibe. It's a lot of hard work. It's moving furniture, as you've said. There's carpets you don't want to cause damage. You then have to subsequently put right. So there is all of that, but obviously the financial aspect of these biggest projects that I want to ask Josh about is funding all of that as well. There's challenges in one way that are harder at a small domestic job, but then this big stuff must be pretty intense, I would guess, with the funding. Do you use grants, Josh, or is it all client funded? How do you make it work?
Yeah, so there's a couple different options in the commercial space. We're quite lucky in Wales that we've got something called the Development Bank, which is the Welsh government's bank, or it's a separate private bank that the Welsh government have some part in which they've got green loans available. So it's quite a simple process for any Welsh business to apply for, to draw down some funding, a very competitive rate to sort of fund and accelerate the implementation of renewable technologies. Outside of that, there's also options like power purchase agreements, where we go and find the money to install solar on a commercial premises. And then the commercial premises owner buys every kilowatt off us at a fixed rate. Is another way of funding it. So they get their green credentials. It's not necessarily a huge saving for the business with a PPA in the current market, as grid costs have fallen quite a lot. They're now down at roughly 17 pence for some of our large scale customers now. So there's not a huge saving with a PPA, but they do get to have those environmental benefits.
Do you see that, Sam, around here? Some of the biggest stuff you're doing, you've been involved in any grants or anything at a commercial scale yet?
No, I'm kind of finding my feet with a lot of that. The 100 kilowatt one that we're hopefully starting towards the end of next month, that one is all funded through the business, like through the business we're working for. But the PPAs are quite an interesting one, because I'd heard of the power purchase agreements, but I never fully understood how they actually worked. So on those power purchase agreements, then Josh, effectively the whoever's funding it funds the install of the equipment on the basis that whatever that company is it based on the generation that's fed into that building,
yeah,
from the solar? So they effectively get is it like two bills then? Do they get one from their energy provider for whatever they do buy outside of the solar, and then another bill from the company that's funded the solar, almost paying that system off? Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah, absolutely correct. So the way that the PPA companies make their money is the fact that they have additional costs. They've got the full maintenance and upkeep. They make their money by the system being online and profitable. So whether that's cleaning, inverter replacements, whatever that may be. But yeah, they get two energy bills, the end consumer at that point, one from the grid supplied electricity and one from the PPA company. And the idea with the PPA is that it's sized for nearly 100% self-consumption, because otherwise any of that money you're paying to the PPA company and you export that power, you're going to near enough lose it on the rates between export on commercial and what you're buying it from the PPA company for.
So the benefit to that business that has signed up to the PPA as the consumer, if you like, is that you mentioned 17p, that they're only paying 17p for their energy rather than buying it at 25p or whatever it is from the grid. So they're making that 5-6p saving, or whatever the difference is. They're
Correct.
Not getting the solar for free. They're paying the PPA company for it. The PPA company are making the 17p on the energy that has been generated and fed into the property, but that is effectively repaying them for funding the project.
Exactly, yeah.
There we go. That's a bit of business research for myself. Thank you very much. Yeah. No, fantastic. I found that quite interesting, actually.
It is interesting. I mean, this is a whole other level to where we are at the minute in my business, for sure. And one of the reasons I want to do this podcast is to have these conversations, Josh, to learn from other installers like yourself and from Sam. So that is really, really interesting. And we've had discussions over on Twitter, Josh, as well, about the different planning rules in England and in Wales, with the differences where you have to keep panels in a certain location in a garden and such at a small domestic level. But is there requirements with planning around these big systems as well? I assume that's pretty difficult.
It is, yeah. So where possible, these systems fit under permitted development for us. So when we're looking at sort of anything sub megawatt, we tend not to require planning as long as you follow the single rule in Wales, which is a meter away from the edge, whether that's on commercial, pitched or flat, as well as the fact that if it's not in a area of outstanding natural beauty or scientific interest or any sort of the common caveats with planning, you're fine to go.
That's really interesting because it is weird in the UK that our regions are so different with planning. We think with the UK we'd have some sort of combined policy, wouldn't you?
Yeah. I think because obviously we're going into this world of commercial a little bit more, and we found out about the 1 meter planning rules to keep it under permitted development as well. Luckily, the one that we've got is under that that we've won. But it's all these intricacies that you don't really find out till you're in that space where you're having to actually design a system and investigate how you need to install it, how you need to wire it up, and all of the paperwork that goes with it. And that's why these conversations, like you've said, are really valuable, because you're learning from people that have done it and that have gone through that pain, and we're stealing all of your knowledge on it, Josh. But yeah, that's really good. And I saw you did a project. Was it New Directions? Was it the biggest in roof in your area?
Correct. Yeah. So we did a project at the sort of end half of last year where we went on the roof, got the scaffolding up, and the scaffolders fell through the roof. The tiles started to give way around them, which it wasn't expected, and it's hard to tell with a tiled roof before you get up to its sort of level. Even we took a drone up beforehand, that how far they had perished. So we sort of had to have a sit down with the customer and go, look, we can look at installing and patching up the roof in certain locations whilst we put the hooks in to sort of allow this installation to continue. But these panels are designed to last 25 years, and your investment in this is for a 25-year period. So realistically, you're going to be taking these off to refix your roof in the next 5-10 years, when it will have absolutely perished.
Yeah.
So you're better now to use these panels as a covering for the roof and use an in-roof system, and look at deploying arc boxes and everything else to minimize the risk of in-roof. Than pay for the re-roof, which I think their quote for just the re-roof was about 300 grand. It was a huge amount of money. And the solar coming in with that wasn't a whole lot more. So it was far more beneficial for them to do both at the same time.
Because you had a project like that, didn't you, Matt, with where the felt had perished on a domestic level?
So I was going to say that it's the same sort of principle, but obviously far more costly at a large scale that Josh is at there. But same thing, you don't want to put 25-year lifespan solar panels on top of something that it's not going to see that time frame out, and you're going to need to lift it off to do something about it. And as Josh said, it's the same thing. You can send your drone up, you can have a look as best you can at the survey stage, but until you get on that roof, you're never 100% sure, are you? So that can sometimes be a difficult conversation, although I'm sure at a domestic level, when I don't know what a typical re-roof might cost, it's less of a factor than these big commercial systems, because an extra 300 grand bill is going to be a bit of a deal breaker, I would have thought. Is it, Josh?
Certainly, yeah. It's one of those where you have to have a really understanding client to sort of get through the point of, this is in their best interest for them. Luckily they own the building themselves, so they have a vested interest in the asset, because at a commercial level, you just look at everything as an asset and trying to maximize that. And as well as the fact that they want to help out the planet and have a really good green credential out of it. So it is a win-win in some regards, but it's an unexpected one.
Yeah, I think just thinking about that whilst you were talking, it's almost, when it's a company, obviously there'll be directors or shareholders of that company, but it's not coming out of anyone's individual pocket. I think when you have a domestic property, it's coming out of Mr. or Mrs. Smith's holiday fund, or kids' savings or whatever. So it's a bit more personal when there's a big problem like that. I suppose, like you mentioned, Josh, certainly if they own the building, by upgrading the roof, it's kind of like, well, thank goodness we've noticed now, before we had loads of damage that happened that maybe prevented everyone coming in to work. Or so I suppose, even though it's a big uplift on the cost of the job, it's not coming out of anyone's holiday fund or uni fund or anything like that. Whereas domestically, they're feeling it, aren't they? Out of, even if they have to get like a private loan or something, it's them personally. So I suppose that's a big difference, is you're not spending your own money necessarily.
No, it's usually I guess there's a big team of people making those decisions on these bigger jobs, Josh, where it might be a board of director level rather than an individual homeowner. Is that typically the kind of arrangement that you have on these big projects?
Correct. Yeah. Usually we have to go in and pitch to an entire board of individuals, where that's the FD, the IT director, the chairman, the chief exec, whoever that may be in the company. And there's a group decision made at the end of it of who they're going to proceed with, what they're going to proceed with. In that case, it's generally a competitive process as well. In commercial, there's very rarely a relationship driven sale.
Yeah, I guess it's tender driven. Will it be largely as well? So you're competing from a specification against other people pitching, and then they'll maybe invite a final three in for that kind of direct pitch at the board. Is that how it usually goes down?
Exactly like that. Yeah. The issue we generally find with tenders at the moment is we're just doing one at the moment, and it's out of date before it's even been released. In some senses, they've had someone come along previously, they've specified it, and it's got 17th edition wiring regs that we have to comply to, not up to date with the latest. And it's like, right, okay, G59, which predates G99. So getting in with those and just trying to get in with the correct regs and updating their tender for them in some regards, and calling out, this is what you've asked for, but this is what we're going to present because this is correct.
That's such a challenge. And I know we've done a few tenders recently. We had a month where it was almost like all the design work and the pricing work we did was all tenders. And just like you say there, Josh, it's a case of, you see glaring errors in the tenders. Some of them are a paragraph dedicated to the solar bit. Some of them are a document in themselves, like 15, 16 pages dedicated to the solar. And there's usually massive errors in either situation. And you think, well, do we quote and not mention these errors because is that what everyone else is doing? Or do we price it correctly, but probably price ourselves outside of the competition and not win the job? So that for me was a real head scratcher, because it's like, we're going to do the installation right no matter what, but how do we get our foot through the door if we haven't got an actual relationship with that customer already? How do we get our foot through the door to start that conversation of saying, look, we've priced it as per the tender, but your tender is pretty outdated. So it is actually a big challenge, and one that I wasn't really aware of, coming from more of a domestic background, and seeing this big document, thinking they're talking rubbish here. This is a copy and paste job from many years ago.
Yeah, we see that at normal electrical work again, where the pre-questionnaire stage at a tender, where you can read the tender and go back to the authors of it and say, we've got a question on this, and this. And when we've done that in the past with EICR projects and bigger commercial installs that we've done. So if you do see that, you can ask those questions, but it's the same. You're kind of second guessing yourself. Is anyone else going to ask these same questions? So they're just going to think we're a bit fussy and we're going to be poking around in places we shouldn't, and they just want a simple job. Do you have those thoughts running through your mind, Josh, when you're looking at these tenders?
All the time. I think one that stands out to me from last week was, we went to a site. They had a professional specifier come in to write the tender, and they had Solar Edge listed down to work on split phase using the 3-phase inverters from Solar Edge. Now, Sam, I can't see him on the call, but it's one of those. Wins. Yeah, it's just, it's great that they've specified Solar Edge, but Solar Edge 3-phase inverters aren't compatible with split phase. So you have to use 2 single-phase inverters to make that solution work. But again, that's not what was on the tender and not what they've specified. So you've got to go and correct that and have those conversations again at the question stage with the tender, going, hey, the solution that you want doesn't exist, but this is the next best alternative.
Yeah, I think that is a real tricky one, because you go, well, we're going to price for two singular inverters rather than 1 3-phase inverter. But then again, it comes into your mind, is everyone else just doing the 3-phase inverter, or how is this working? And yeah, it does. I don't know if as installers and designers and everything, if we overthink it and we should just go, that is what needs to happen, I just hope everyone else does it correctly. And if they do go for another installer that hasn't based it on that, then they're going to hit a lot of problems, and that installer isn't going to make any money on that. But it is tricky because you do dedicate, I know we do, dedicate a lot of time to these tenders. And, you know, as soon as you have your 8th, 9th, 10th one that you don't win, it really disheartens you from carrying on with them.
Yeah, I mean,
certainly.
and you're bringing in risk. So every time everyone you're pricing that risk into your business. If it's an unknown, it's what you see that risk as and what value you put in it to your business. Because if you get it wrong and you go to deliver that project, it can very soon start costing you money to go to work if those mistakes are made. So, you know, if there are unknowns in there, you've either got to do what you said and price that in as a risk to the project, or ask the question. Don't just go in blindly assuming that it'll work out in the end, because when you take that view, so far, so good. I've not been bitten, but I heard the stories of other people who have, and I think all of us here on this call now would very much like to avoid that.
Come on then, Josh. What's your biggest one that you've been bitten on? You don't have to say numbers, but what's the biggest
I think
one
the biggest one we've been bitten on is one we did to help someone out who had been, it was a Victron system, so something we don't usually touch. But someone had spent £60,000 on this Victron system, and the installer had run away. It stopped working. That they didn't want to pick up the phone, visit site, or it was just a disaster. And that was the one that I sort of priced it to help the person out, because it was I felt really bad for what's happened, and we lost some significant money on that project. But at the end of the day, it's cleaning up the industry one install at a time. And, if we lose money on the odd one that helps someone out, I don't have a huge issue with it. If it was every job, then I would be in a much worse position.
Yeah, I think for me, we had one where we didn't we missed off our pricing. It was as we were swapping between one software to another for our pricing, and we missed off all of the solar edge optimizers, and we won the job. No wonder, because we'd missed off the optimizers, and so we just had to take the hit on that one. But yeah, I certainly wasn't thinking about cleaning up the industry at that point. I was thinking we can never let this happen again. But it happens, and it's part of the learning process, and that kind of brings me on to one thing I was quite interested on the business side of things, as to Mark mentioned about how you've got to have that pipeline of work, and because they take maybe nearly a year to confirm, which I've started to find on some of the bigger ones we've priced, that when they do confirm and they, there's PPAs, there's all these other factors in this jobs, even just starting. How do you kind of have to plan as far as the financial side of that? Does the PPA money take a while to come in? Have you got a sort of a time scale of risk that you are at risk before that money comes in, or how do you manage that side of it?
That's the toughest part of commercial work, is funding the installations, because lots of commercial installations, at least for us, we don't get paid until material lands on site. That's generally our sort of first payment on some of these commercial projects. Right. Contracts are signed prior to that, but that's where the risk is between when we order materials, which, on some of our projects can be £200,000, £300,000 worth of materials. We've got to, have that risk for a period of time. So, it's one of those that we have to look at on a case-by-case basis of the businesses we're working with or the funders we're working with, and make those business decisions to go, do we want to take the risk? Some of them will get deposits on, which are great, and they can be, especially on the smaller commercial works, we get deposits. But on some of the larger ones, it is a bit of a risk.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the similarities with domestic and commercial are the same. We all have those financial worries, getting deposit payments off consumers, and then cash flow management. It's just a bigger scale, isn't it, Josh? Where if something goes wrong at your level, it ends up being quite a bite on the backside. Whereas maybe certainly at my level, speaking personally, we could maybe get away with that from one particular customer. So yeah, it's not without its risks, and hopefully you get the rewards from the efforts that you're doing there. It's nice to see that you've built up a business there that's employing 10 people out doing solar work, and I'm sure you're still on your upward trajectory in your business with your plans you've got going forward. Is there any project that kind of stands out in your mind that you're really proud of, something that you've done so far that's maybe your favorite?
I think one of my most favorite projects at this point is the car park project I mentioned earlier, where it's 390 kilowatts. It was our largest solar edge project. We had to custom import those panels from Valencia, Spain, as it was for a public sector organization. There's certain modern slavery issues with some of the Chinese panel manufacturers, and so compliance in that side of it. And as a project goes, it was beautiful in the fact that we had 250 amp rising buzz bars on either side of the car park that we could tap off and utilize. So the electrical work, and we're not running in any huge SWA cables or HO7 cables, which we usually have to do. So it was a lovely project to have, and we had a lovely time lapse of it, which we're hoping to release in the next little bit and get some amazing case studies out of.
That's really interesting with the panel selection as well there that you've mentioned. You mentioned as well about safety of these things at a commercial level earlier on in this podcast. And I know from having seen some of the posts on social media, I think it was a little shop that had set on fire with the PV panels. So there's these risks. Is it right to say that historically a lot of these PV systems at a commercial scale would be normal string systems without optimizers? And you'd mentioned now utilizing solar edge. Is that you trying to cover off that risk in your business going forward?
Certainly, yeah. No, it's very standard in the commercial sector just to use string inverters, mainly because of, unlike residential, you're generally working on one or two faces of a commercial trapezoidal roof. So you're not worried as much about, different roof spaces or angles or shading or anything like that. Usually it's one massive plane of panels. So I think bringing in optimization into that or microinverters, but I don't think Enphase is there on commercial yet. But especially on optimizers with Solar Edge is the correct direction for the industry to go for the time being.
Music to my ears. I'm a big believer in the Solar Edge side of things, and always have been. And I think we've seen it on the small level of commercial stuff that we've started to look at. Insurers actually driving that choice rather than the customers, because ultimately these businesses don't want to avoid any insurance or not be able to get insurance because of the system they've just spent 300 grand on or more. So insurers, I think, will actually drive that change in the market, and maybe the regulations or something like that will catch up with that change. And obviously, this isn't to advertise Solar Edge, but like the DC safe side of things and shutting down those modules and the arc fault monitoring and heat monitoring of the MC4s and all this good stuff that we could probably do in domestic as well, especially after this past document has come out and started to elevate our attention more towards what we're challenged with in the domestic sector. Whilst there isn't people staying and sleeping in the commercial sector, some of those risks transfer and are actually a lot more probably probable in commercial, because you've got so many more connections, so many more panels, so much more stuff that can go wrong. But it's just the fact that no one's sleeping there. But like we saw in that little warehouse, whatever it was, it's on such a huge scale when something does go wrong that I think the panel by panel safety aspect of it, not to name drop the brand again, is something that definitely will come in more. And we tend to spec everything as Solar Edge on commercial, certainly because of that very factor. Because I don't want my name to be on a LinkedIn post of a next little warehouse or anything like that.
It's not a good look, is it?
No, it's not good. No, it's not a case study worthy job, that is it?
No.
So in terms of other types of protection with the commercial stuff, Josh, I assume you have to use string fuses and stuff as well on these bigger array sizes. Is that something you're laying out with these installs too?
Yeah, correct. So, we're quite lucky again with Solar Edge that in the Synergy managers we use, they're all fused at that point, it's brilliant. But yeah, arc boxes, especially on the in-roof stuff we do as standard, making sure that any of the MC4s we terminate are covered in ceramic, so that if there is ever a fault, it's not going to affect the wider installation. Other protection, you're looking at your SPDs and, even lightning protection on commercial is quite a big one. We're installing the highest point on a metal roof in some cases. So we've got to look at that. Lots of commercial premises don't have any SPTs in at all. Especially because they're existing installations that are around for several years before they're updated. And a number of other objects. Also scaffolding is a key one on the installation aspect, not just the products we use. I've seen so many commercial installers just bouncing around on roofs without any edge protection recently. And it's, just that you see where the cost cutting is in the sector, and it's just going the wrong way in that sense.
What's your thoughts on the man-safe lines and things like that around these? Does that tend to be a standard thing that gets installed, or?
Yeah, certainly. I think on the pitch roofs that we've done, man-safe systems are important. On the metal roofs, it's hard to install it on anything else, obviously. But it's again one of those that I personally don't think man-safe is great from an installation aspect, only because of the limited movement, and also anything falling off the roof is also a key risk there, because man-safe won't stop that if someone drops their tools. At least at scaffolding, it should fall onto that. And there's a number of other risks I see with man-safe on an installation basis.
Yeah, and just for people that aren't aware of the man-safe system, because I've only just recently learned about it, it's basically a high tensile line that goes around the roof area that you can clip onto, like harness onto, isn't it? I believe.
Correct. Yeah.
Perfect. So I got that right then. And my research.
It's from watching some of our American friends installing solar. They seem to do that quite consistently up ladders and tying onto the ridges, even at a domestic level, where they're then using lines onto themselves. And I think they do have to use optimizers as well on every system over in America. I guess that's the construction of those buildings, though, aren't it? Timber, you get nice solid fixings. We can't really go and do that up here in the UK. But it's interesting that the scaffold stuff's still a problem for you guys in the commercial space, Josh, because I thought it was just the domestic level where you saw people dragging panels up ladders and dangling off rooftops. So it's interesting that it is in more places than just that.
Yeah, no, it was weird. It was very surreal because it happened. So we got our office in Cardiff, and the people opposite us didn't come to us for a quote, but they got solar installed. And I saw some people.
So annoying.
And I was going, hang on, what were they on the roof when I could see them carrying panels and putting some mounting system? I'm going, there's no scaffolding around these people. And yeah, it's crazy. Just the sort of cowboys that exist in the industry that will put profit over safety, which just is absolutely the wrong way to make a decision. But in the commercial space, at least, we've got sort of CDM regulations that at least we can point out and follow, that it's somewhat of the client's responsibility to make sure the health and safety documentation is correct. And it falls down to both parties at that point, not just the installer.
That's interesting. So yeah, because of course that's a workplace, isn't it? So that client is going to take on the health and safety of people coming onto their site.
Correct.
Which adds an extra layer of paperwork, I suppose, over possibly a domestic. One thing that I was going to sort of touch on was, we've just been speaking on a different podcast about payback times in domestic and things like that, but it's very challenging on the domestic side because of the limited usage that these properties have compared to a building like you've been just mentioning there, that can have PPAs and things. But how do things like the PPAs affect the payback time of these jobs that are on such a huge scale? Obviously, I'm not asking for exact years, but do you tend to see a good payback time on most of your projects, or are they doing it for green supply chain reasons, where they're being requested by supply chain to actually show green credentials? I know that's kind of coming in as well.
Certainly. So with a PPA, there's never really an ROI time for the customer, because they never will own that asset. But on a capital purchase or finance model, it's a bit of a mixture. Most of our clients will do it for a combined benefit, more so than just a environmental or a financial. But even then, if we're talking about say £100,000 installation, you're looking from anywhere between sort of 3.5 to 5 years ROI, which is vastly different from what the sort of residential space is.
For sure.
I'd give my back teeth for some of that payback time on domestic. Yeah.
Well, the numbers are obviously bigger and the budgets are going to be harder to maybe get at that level. But if you can justify the payback at those kind of time frames, that's a big win, isn't it, for any kind of consumer?
Oh, absolutely. As a business, they would struggle, apart from maybe LED lighting, to make an investment that will pay back that quickly. I would have thought. Yeah, that's some really good numbers on that, and ones that I would love to have in most of my domestic projects.
What are you seeing in residential as the ROI at the moment, out of curiosity?
Varies a lot, doesn't it? But we've just kind of been saying kind of 7 to 10 years, I would say, is my kind of rough figure in the air, typical example.
Mine, I don't know if this means that we're ripping people off or what have you, but ours tend to be, I can't remember the last time that we had one that was under 10 years. It's usually sort of 15 to 20 years, but there's a lot of intricacies there because of backup protect, adding extra battery capacity for backup protection for the building, load shifting abilities on the batteries, and all these things that don't necessarily help with payback time, but are additional functions on the system. So yeah, it's a very murky world. But I suppose with commercial, because they're using so much power, the payback time is actually a lot easier to calculate, because you probably haven't got the need to have huge battery systems to make these work. They might help in some cases, but because of the huge amount of usage at that property during daylight hours, usually, it's probably quite an easy calculation to make.
Do you think you're kind of sat in a sticky part of industry at the minute in terms of the payback, because you're above us in terms of your project sizes with the batteries and stuff? We're typically one battery module, small inverter, 10 panels.
Yeah.
So that payback equation is quite quick at a residential level. You're scoped up from that with more batteries, so it's that bigger capital investment at the start where it takes longer to get the money back. And then Josh, right at the top of all of this, with huge arrays generating lots of power. So you thinking maybe between those two, how is it?
Yeah, honestly, Mark, it feels sticky every single day I got to work. Yeah, it is a sticky area, I think, and you've probably nailed that, actually, because it's trying to get that balance where you're offering as a company more functionality out of these systems that are great when you're chatting to the customer, but then when they're signing up to a contract of a system that they know, because of the document you've had to supply them for MCS, that they're not going to get their money back potentially for 20 years. But having that honest conversation with them about, well, this is because of the extra wiring and time and everything needed to do the backup and all the other stuff that we've spoken about recently is quite tricky. Whereas, like you said, Josh is at the top of that tree with these big systems where actually it's kind of, we'll pump all this power into your building, you'll use it because you're here, you're manufacturing, you're building, you're doing whatever during the day that's being generated, you're gonna soak all of that up. So I think we've nailed there that I've got the hardest job. That's fine.
Is that what we're saying, Josh?
Thank you. That's going to feel so much better for the weekend.
I've got one more question on these bigger systems, Josh, before I've kind of run out of things to ask you, and that's around the maintenance side of this. So obviously at a domestic level, we have certain timeframes where we'd recommend rechecking the solar system. What are the requirements like for you guys in terms of your initial test process when you're first commissioning something, but then going forward, how does that map out?
Yeah, generally on commercial side, we'll do an inspection 6 months after the system's been installed, just to make sure that everything is correct, embedded in correctly. We want to make sure that these systems don't have any issues for their lifespan, and 6 months seems like a reasonable first inspection point. Then after that, we go for a more annualized inspection process where we're going through all the testing and visual inspections to make sure that the panel's performing correctly, as well as possibly cleaning the array itself as well to make sure that there's no bird mess on there or anything like that that could be affecting generation.
It's interesting because I know from kind of a domestic level, people are generally watching this stuff through apps and they notice if things aren't maybe working as they should be, where at a commercial scale, that maybe might not always be the case. It could be something that's kind of fit and forgot, if you like. So the fact you're going back and checking this stuff, you're going to highlight those things and make sure the system's optimized in the way it's performing, but also safe.
Correct. Yeah. And I think that's one of the big differences. There's a middle scale of organization where, some of the larger public sector bodies we deal with have energy managers and teams of energy managers that their job is to, monitor building consumption and check, the solar arrays are performing in line with what they're expecting it to. Compared to some of the medium-sized organizations, which there is no one's role for energy management. It's maybe a part of the role for a facilities manager or it's just going to be one of the factory managers sort of look at, and they don't generally get the time to. So it's really key that, you know, the system is performing in line with what's expected.
Yeah, I think that comes back to who's spent the money, doesn't it? You know, when we're doing these domestic level installation, it's coming out, like we mentioned, personal savings, or they've had a personal loan or something like that. Whereas when you're working for a business that's just spent, you know, 150 grand on a new solar PV system, it's massive numbers, as we've said, but it's not come out of anyone's individual pocket. And so it can, I suppose, fall into that area where it is fit and forget, because it doesn't make any direct impact on that person that is maybe being told, oh, by the way, John, look at this every 6 months, if you wouldn't mind. Whereas, you know, John's busy doing everything else, all of his other roles in the business, that he maybe just doesn't get the chance to do it. So yeah, that's a good point about the maintenance. And is, as far as on the maintenance side of things, is that something that you set up during the costs during an initial contract stage, or is that something that you kind of quote for throughout the, you know, every year, if that's how frequently you do it?
Yeah, so it's sort of two prices. There's the initial installation price, where we go, right, this is what your fixed capital amount is for going forward with us. And then there's another bit that we have the chat about, you know, what the maintenance includes and how it works, how it affects their system. Because especially when you're talking about, you know, investing 150,000 pounds, you know, a maintenance visit is negligible in that entire amount to make sure that that is correct. So generally, people will go for the amount the maintenance costs is generally an accepted cost.
Okay. One thing that I would like to get your thoughts on is, have you had chance to look at any of the past document or anything like that? I know it obviously falls massively outside of your scope with doing more commercial side of things, but has it made you think any differently about where you're installing this stuff, or does that get stipulated to you by, you know, the fire officer of that building or the health and safety person of that building?
So certainly have those conversations. You know, lots of our solar edge systems are starting to include the rapid shutdown for in the fire gateway and other bits with SE. But you know, in terms of battery storage, because we're not installing an awful amount of it, an awful lot of it, we don't generally have those conversations. But when we do, and we do an odd domestic array for someone we know, you know, it's one of those that we've been on the page for quite a while now about having batteries outside the property. You know, and I think that's a sensible decision all around. Now, in the past document, I think it mentions exactly where outside as well, obviously not near a fire exit and other bits. I've not looked through it in detail, but you know, I think it's common sense approaches to where you should put batteries. You know, I don't think batteries should be, you know, under a stairwell in a house, for example. I think that's an awful place to put it, both for access to install and a fire safety point of view. And you know, same with lofts. You know, there's only a couple of occasions I think we've ever installed battery in a loft, and that's mainly because the installer's gone bust and already put everything up there. And it's like, where do you put the balance for a customer of, right, you know, we want to make this array work and change it all. And I think we've only done it twice since we started the business. And yeah, completely agree. They shouldn't be up there.
There's a whole other podcast about legacy systems, isn't there? That we could go into. Definitely. And yeah, it's a real tricky area when you get onto that. So you mentioned favorite equipment there. You kind of moving over on Solar Edge, and is there any sort of favorite panels or anything like that, fixing systems that you like to use for any other commercial installers that watch this?
Yeah, I'm a massive fan of the K2, you know, trapezoidal mounting systems. I think they're great on a metal roof. I think they're pitched on their sort of tiled roofs. I'm more of a fan of ESDEC. I think their click fit system is excellent. And then on the flat roof side of things, we've been using Vandervalk for a long time now, and we've just deployed 390 kilowatt of it on a single flat roof, and it's brilliant. You know, we don't have any complaints. So you know, and back again, you know, looking at isolation equipment, even, you know, we've been huge on IMO when we were doing a lot of DC isolators with Solis. And you know, just trying to stick with the big brands that have the reputation that's going to back up what you install, because as everything in this industry, there's no point spending £300 less for something worse than may not make it that lifespan, or you don't have absolute faith in. It's one of those that for such small amounts, even on a domestic system, the difference of £300 is negligible. So it's just worth spending that little bit extra to get the best quality products.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm totally in that camp. And I think the last thing for me, because I'm not sure how much time we've got left, but the last thing from me would be, with these sort of systems, do you face a lot of export limitation requirements from DNOs? And say, look, you can have 300 kilowatts, but you can only send us back 100, for example.
Exactly. So we're just going through the motions now on 600 kilowatts for a industrial unit in a massively industrial area. And on that 600 kilowatt we want to install, we're only allowed to export 99, which seems to be the sort of the default max export limit we face. Same again in a centre of Cardiff sort of industrial area. That was a 150 kilowatt system with a 99 kilowatt export limit. So we're seeing, 99 is sort of a favorite just to allow something, but it's nowhere near enough in the grand scheme of what we're installing.
That's really interesting. I've loved chatting with you, Josh, this afternoon. I've learned absolutely bucket loads.
I have as well. I've made lots of notes.
Yeah. And this is exactly the purpose of the Renewables podcast. It's one of the reasons we've started this, Sam. So thanks for sharing all that, Josh. It's going to be massively helpful to those people listening along, as well as Sam sat over there scribbling away notes. You can't see him, but it has been doing.
I have.
Is there anything else you want to mention while you are with us today, Josh? Anything you want to cover off?
No, but thank you very much for having me on. It's been a pleasure and I've loved talking to you both.
And I will drop links to Josh's LinkedIn profile and his Twitter profile. So if you want to go and ask any questions about this stuff, you can pester him on social media as well after this show. Anything you want to add to close, Sam?
No, just another big thank you for me personally as well, to be fair, Josh, but also for being so open and honest with the challenges and with everything that you as a business face. And I think it will be, this is, again, like Mark said, what this podcast is about. It's about sharing that knowledge, and anyone looking like myself in my company to make the step from domestic up to commercial, just those little nuggets around PPAs and some of the paperwork side of things, and equipment that you're having to install, and all these different intricacies, 1 meter zones around the edges, just all very, very important. So yeah, thank you very much.
No problem at all.
Cheers, Josh. Sorry, Sam, you can send us out on this one.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say thank you very much, Josh. If you've liked this show, and hopefully you have, then please subscribe to the channel, put a thumbs up, and all of that's good stuff. Leave a comment, ask any questions, and when we have other people like Josh on here, we can pose the questions to them as well. Help us grow and help the conversation span across all areas of industry. We have lots of really cool guests lined up, so keep your eyes peeled. Thanks very much, and we'll see you again soon.
Awesome.